Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I am here with.
Hi, my name's Sam Gregor-Stewart. I'm the RPG development manager over at Edge Studio and the lead designer on the Arkham Horror role-playing game.
Thank you, Sam, for taking the time to talk to us. You've been writing games for a long, long time. I want to say at least about over 15 years. Am I correct about that?
Oh, you're in the ballpark. I first started working on role-playing games back when Fantasy Flight Games was working on the Warhammer 40,000 role-playing series. I did a ton of work on Rogue Trader and Black Crusade. So it's been about 15 years now, about since 2010.
And currently now you're with Edge Studios, which you're doing you have your hand in Star Wars, Legend of Five Rings, usually anything with the Genesis rule system. And
Yep.
now today we're going to talk about Arkham Horror, the role playing game, which I'm very excited about because pre-COVID this was my game to go to for a while. And I'll be honest, I'm not really into like solo card games so much, but I don't know. It's a really quick game. Well, not quick, but it's a really good game where if I'm in the mood to play, and I love horror, and not everyone I know loves horror. So if I just want to try something out, that's a really great game to play. Very tough. I don't think I've ever beaten it in any of the scenarios in the game. So if I may ask, what has led Ed Studios to decide, hey, we have the card game. Let's make a role playing game version of this.
Arkham Horror has always been an interesting idea to do a role playing game in, but it has a special set of circumstances around it because, of course, it is based in the Cthulhu mythos and the Lovecraftian mythos. So some of that is public ownership in the public domain, particularly a lot, but not all of the stuff Lovecraft has written. But there are elements of what people consider the broader Cthulhu mythos that aren't. And so, because we have a good working relationship with not only the other studios in Asmodee, but other studios outside of Asmodee, um, such as Chaosium, who do work with the Lovecraft mythos famously, of course. Um, we wanted to make sure that everything we do um, was going to work out well legally, basically. So for the longest time, especially back in Fantasy Flight Games, we felt like we had enough other stuff to keep us busy. And with Star Wars, with Genesis, and with way back in the day with Warhammer 40,000 and Warhammer Fantasy, those occupied everyone's spare time. But now, with Edge Studio being founded as a studio that is focused entirely on role playing games in the Asmodee umbrella, if you will, the we have been trying to think of what games are we going to make that are not just the continuation of what FFG worked on, but also what games are new, what are we going to do that sort of establishes Edge as a legitimate RPG studio. And my boss, Michael Cordneau, he set his sights on Arkham Horror, the role playing game. And so it took a lot of work. We worked with our colleagues in the franchise development branch of Asmodee. We worked with our friends over at Fantasy Flight Games. And there's a lot of discussions. And we also had a lot of discussions and back and forth with Chaosium, who are a bunch of great people. So in the end, though, we were able to create this. And so it's basically something we've always wanted to do, especially once Edge Studio got founded. But it just took a substantial amount of time to make it happen.
I have so many questions to ask you, especially about what's in the core rulebook and the starter set. And I'm trying not to rush into that just yet because I'm very interested to know your creation process behind it. But before you even get into that, you mentioned something that's very interesting. Usually, when I think of companies and when they produce either similar products or anything like that, I usually think that they're very aggressive toward each other. And you mentioned that you talked to the Chaosium team about this as well. Is that a normal thing, usually, or usually most companies um, like that? Because I think a lot of people, especially with a certain company that may have sent, like for example, Pinkertons uh, to visit a certain individual. So I think a lot of people think that companies are like this normally.
Well, I can't speak for every company, obviously. Just the one I work for, and even then, I'm like, there. I certainly can't speak for everybody at Asmodee. It's a large company, but I can say that um, that we wanted to create a project that wasn't. We didn't see it as a direct competition with Call of Cthulhu. I like to hope that Chaosium doesn't see that as a direct competition either, because the way we see it, we wanted to make a game that was very focused on the pulp side of Arkham Horror, the trench coats, fedoras, and 45 Colts facing off against the Elder Gods. Two-fisted heroism. Chaosium has often focused more on a very, well, horror-focused product, and absolutely respect them for that. But honestly, we believe that if we tried to compete directly with not just Chaosium, but a lot of the other Cthulhu Mythos products on the market, that wasn't going to be a winning strategy for us. Arkham Horror has always had that element of pulp. One of my first favorite memories of Arkham Horror was playing the Arkham Horror board game, going up against Dieg with a blessed shotgun, and just seeing how many sixes I could roll to send Dieg back to the chaos planes or whatever. And that's not horror so much. That's kind of silly, fun heroism action, and we wanted a certain element of that in our game, and we felt like there was an opening in the broad market of Cthulhu Mythos role-playing games for something along those lines. So yeah, I don't think we're in competition. Honestly, we all benefit if more people become interested in the Lovecraft slash Cthulhu mythos overall. And at the same time, we're continuing to develop Arkham Horror as its own unique setting. Um, and this isn't just us. There's a lot of work being done by Fantasy Flight Games and by, like I said, franchise development. They sort of shepherd the IP in anyone who works with it in the Asmodee Studios, sort of the lore keepers of Asmodee, if you will. And so everyone's goal is to make this a more unique setting. We don't just want to be another Cthulhu setting. We want to have our own elements that people get excited about and interested about.
So let's talk about the creation process. So when you're given a project to do, um, and it's a totally new game from scratch almost, where does your mind go? Do you think first about like setting? Do you think about rules? Do you think about artwork? How does it work for you?
That's a good question. It can vary. When I worked on Genesis, that one was primarily focused on the rules, partially because the whole concept behind it was, what if we took this existing system that we had and adapted it to something that could be setting agnostic? So, but I'll admit that I was thinking a bit about settings like Twilight Imperium or Android, and thinking it'd be kind of cool if we did some stuff linked to that. I'll admit, after working on Star Wars for, at that point, it had been like 6 or 7 years. Um, I was excited to do something hard sci-fi. So Android was particularly appealing to me. In this case, it was definitely rules first because we knew what the setting was going to be, and I had direction from my bosses that they wanted a lighter and more flexible system that could appeal to a younger audience as well as but also be enjoyed by an adult audience. And also, as part of that accessibility, one of the reasons, for example, we used a d6, a six-sided die, is that they are, I mean, they're the most common dice out there. And so we could have done the game system with other size of dice. And in fact, I had been sort of designing this in my spare time for a while, and originally I thought it would be a 10-sided die system, but six-sided die, because it would be, you can rip open any Monopoly board game in the house, even if you aren't a minis player or an RPG player, and you still got some six-sided dice you can use. Um, that one was more mechanics focused. We knew what the setting was going to be, and we knew what we wanted out of the game. So it was started with, how do we make that happen mechanically?
So you mentioned about the rules. Now, I was surprised that this system doesn't use the Genesis system, which I understand correctly. It's similar to what Star Wars uses, where
Mhm.
it's to explain to our viewers, and I'll do my best to explain it. It's pretty much it looks like polyhedral dice, but it has symbols on it. You and the game master together kind of interpret what has been rolled there. So it's possible that you may have a triumph, um, but have some failures with that as well, and you kind of interpreted what happens in that scene, which I think is very wonderful. I remember playing it for the first time. Now I played West End Star Wars for a long,
Mm.
long time,
Mhm.
and then my friend Sean, who's here, who, if you're hearing this, thank you. He introduced me to the Ed Studios version, and at first I was reluctant because of the different dice system, and then using it, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. This works very well for Star Wars, being that Star Wars is a very action-packed game. So I was surprised that Arkham Horror is using D6s instead. If I may ask, what led to the decision of that?
Oh, no, of course. A big part of it was that accessibility issue. If we wanted to make sure that it was a game that could work without us having to worry about supply chain issues. One of the unfortunate issues that we had with the pandemic a few years ago was getting dice reprinted and shipped out. There were a couple years there where we just couldn't make it happen. And even now, when we get a reprint in, they go very quickly, which obviously very gratifying to us that people still want them. But even though it's a good problem to have, it's still a problem to have. So by doing six-sided dice, we knew we did not have to worry about the extra complications by creating, worrying about the molds, creating an extra dice pack, and so forth. Uh, the other element was in our hopes to bring in non-role players to the game. We wanted to appeal to, for example, people who have maybe played the Arkham Horror card game and have never done role playing games before, people who have maybe read a book from Aconite about Arkham Horror and are curious to learn more, people even who have got their friends played the Arkham Horror board game with them a couple times, and now they're like, oh, I'll give this a try. But basically, people who are not necessarily really into role playing but are willing to experiment with it. And so, honestly, one other concern was that the reaction you had, you looked at the dice with the symbols, and you're like, oh, symbols, I'm not sure about this. Um, we wanted to remove even that small speed bump to trying it out by just saying it's a six-sided die. You roll it. You see if you got a high number, it's good. If you get a low number, it's bad. Um, not to make it too simplistic, but that was some of our thinking with it. Also, that doesn't mean we've abandoned Genesis. I've been working on some additional stuff for Genesis. At the same time, we don't have to go into that too much, but um, basically, we see the option for a few different game lines that we can be working on.
So let's talk about the setting for Arkham Horror. What makes this setting unique?
There are a few different things that make the setting unique. One that is has been in the setting for a very long time, ever since Arkham Horror Second Edition, is the characters, the titular investigators, of course, and you see them there on the cover of our starter set, and you actually get to play some of them. Carolyn, Fern, Rita, and Yorick. All of them are characters who have been in many different products. There are books written about them, and so they have a larger than life impact on the setting. And so we continue that in our role playing game. Not always as you will play these characters, although those are the options sometimes, especially if that's something that interests you. But as a you will have a chance to interact with these characters. These characters are part of the world, and they people who have played other versions of the game, other versions of Arkham Horror, such as the card game or the board game, are going to recognize them. But I think the bigger and more important thing that really sets Arkham Horror apart from other settings is the idea of hope and optimism. When you play in our role playing game, the idea is things could be very dire. There are terrible things in the universe. They will drive you mad. Your sanity will shatter under their relentless assault if they don't just eat you, because gibbering horrors with tentacles and toothy maws, etc., etc., etc. But unlike some of the portrayals of the Cthulhu Mythos, in our setting, there is always a chance that you will be able to survive, and not only survive, but maybe defeat the eldritch abominations you're going up against. Um, you may not emerge unscarred, but you can seal the gates, you can banish the monstrosities, and you can emerge victorious. So that element of sort of optimism and um, hope is, I think, something that is somewhat unique to our game, or at least sets it apart from a number of the Cthulhu Mythos games out there. Uh, the one other thing I should mention is that Fantasy Flight has done a great job starting to develop their own unique setting elements, such as some of the unique ancient ones that they've played around with. Um, Magan Arcot, oh god, I'm going to butcher this name, but Ezel, and Selenius are three, or Mysterious, or in fact elder gods, or sorry, ancient ones that are were created as part of the card game and have a heavy focus in our role playing game as well. Um, in fact, the adventure we have been running for at Gen Con and PAX Unplugged is a adventure where you're dealing with some of Asterius, the giant horrible starfish thing. You're dealing with his minions, or its minions.
Probably a very silly question, but Arkham Horror, will it take place in the fictional city of Arkham, Arkham, Massachusetts?
Yes. Our setting, we will expand our setting as we go. But to begin with, we've started out with Arkham, Kingsport, Dunwich, and Innsmouth. And we touch on Providence, Rhode Island a little bit too. But Arkham is a primary focus, and gets a lot of real estate in our core book.
I really like the tone of what you're describing here. So I love that this could be pulp or it could be horror in a sense. Am I understanding that correctly?
You are absolutely understanding that correctly. Our goal is that when you play this game, you can you can sort of balance the pulp and the horror. If you want to lean more heavily into the horror, by all means. But if you prefer to lean a bit more into the pulp heroism, that is very functional in this game too. So
Your company has always done a great job with art. I love what they done with the card game and some other products. Even the Star Wars and Legend of Fire. Oh, Legend of Five Rings. That works.
mhm.
Is fantastic. But that's a different video. For this one, I could see that from the starter set. Again, it's lovely. The let me just show real fast the core rule book. Again, that's fantastic. When it came to the art direction, what did you want to see from this?
Obviously a lot of the art was the responsibility of our art director, Antonio Menez, and so I don't want to claim credit for work that he did. And in fact, that cover piece you have there, he illustrated that himself, and he also did the the starter. Yes, he worked on the starter set illustration as well. But the core book one is all him, so he gets a ton of credit for that. Um, but we do have a lot of art that we've taken that we've reused from the previous editions, as well as a lot of new art we've done as well. And honestly, it was a case where when we had existing art that suited our purposes, we would use it. And when we needed new art because the previous art wasn't sufficient, then we could commission new material. Um, since we wanted to try and um, pay for decent quality art. We had to be judicious as to when we got new stuff and when we reused some of the, quite honestly, great stuff that's already out there. Um, again, from FFG's work, from Asmodee's work in general. Um, but the goal of the art was one, to create some really compelling characters. So some of the new stuff we did was very focused on the characters that you're going to play. So when you look in the core rulebook chapter on building your character, all of the archetypes, for example, have new art. And a lot of some of those early chapter plate spreads have new art as well. And part of the reason was because when we're talking about building a character in the core book, we didn't want to use the existing investigators in the setting. We wanted people to be like, ah, yes, we're playing new characters. We're playing characters that are, we're going to make up ourselves. And we really wanted to push that idea. If you want to play existing characters from the setting, or that's one of the reasons our starter set exists, because there you play, Joe Diamond and Carolyn Fern and Rita Young and all them. If you want to make up your own characters, that's what the core book's for. So we definitely spent a lot of time on that. There were some new pieces for some of the ancient ones out there. When I mentioned Selenius, Asterius, um, Ezols, and Rezel, again, I'm sure I'm messing up that name, and Magan Arkat, all of those, there were only a couple of pieces out there, and we thought that we could do better pieces and honestly higher resolution pieces because card game art doesn't not need to be very large. So there we went for some new stuff. We also did a brand new picture of Cthulhu in there too, to reflect sort of a updated design for how Cthulhu looks regarding the Arkham Horror Cthulhu specifically. It's got some
Mm.
it's got some interesting bits and bobs to him. Now he's looming out of the darkness of a undersea Cyclopean city, so you don't catch all of that, but you definitely catch some of it.
In the starter set, you have investigator portfolios, NPC cards, item and spell cards, several pieces of evidence, double-sided maps, punch tokens, but what and dice. But the physical puzzles, that's something I've never really seen too much of in starter sets. If hopefully I'm not spoiling anything, but what when you say physical puzzles, what do you mean exactly?
Yeah, for sure. So these were a creation of my colleague Leah Hawthorne, and she is the other developer here at Edge Studio. And the starter set was really um, her project. While I was designing the core system, she was getting that starter set finished, and to her eternal credit, she was also having to do it as I was messing around with game design elements. So there were definitely some times when she's like, "Wait, how does this work now? What have you changed on this?" As she's trying to get a box set finished. But sorry, to the puzzles. She wanted to create puzzles that reflected the puzzles from Mansions of Madness. She thought it would be an interesting and interactive thing that we could do, and honestly something new, because like you said, that's not really something that shows up in starter sets or generally in role-playing products. But it is a big part of the Arkham Horror experience, especially for people who have played Mansions of Madness, to mess around with like actual puzzles, especially in second edition when you got the iPad, and they've got some of the puzzles on there. That was really her idea. It's something we could do with Punchboard, and so it wouldn't take a whole ton of like extra plastic or like uniquely molded items, but at the same time, it's it was it was a really interesting idea, and we believe it brings something new to the whole RPG experience.
And then also there is the core rulebook.
Hmm.
I haven't had a chance to look at this yet. What can you tell us about the core rulebook itself? How many pages? Is there what chapters you think would interest new or old fans of Cthulhu?
So the core rulebook is a 256 page rulebook. Um, we wanted to go with something that was um, sufficient, like had a bit of heft to it, but at the same time, we wanted it substantially smaller than some of the rulebooks we've made in the past. The Star Wars rulebooks, for example, we wanted to aim for something that felt a little more accessible and could be priced at a slightly more reasonable, easier to move price. So we went with a 256 page book. The core rulebook, I mean, honestly, this whole thing's my baby. So it's hard to pick one or two things that I think are particularly cool. But I think one thing that I really enjoy are the relics and tomes, and those were created by Maxine Newman, actually, and of course she is or was the lead designer on the Arkham Horror card game. After she did some writing for us and came up with some of the tomes. These are spell books, basically, and some of the artifacts that are already in the setting. And then her and I worked to figure out how that was going to play in the role playing game. So you have some pretty powerful books in there. The ability to do things like summon Shoggoths, and one's called like Ultimate Transmutation, that turns a small bit of matter into antimatter and then creates a giant explosion. What can I say? I do enjoy some very destructive explosives once in a while, but part of the fun was with all of the spells, not just the ones in the tomes, but the ones in character creation as well. Most of the spells have downsides. So it's not like in some games where you have a limited number of resources you can use to cast spells. Here, the spell, you can throw spells all day, but often there are risks associated with it. So one of those is suffering horror, which is something that affects your dice pool and can eventually do some pretty bad things to you. Another thing is sometimes the problems are a little more unique to the spell. So that ultimate transmutation spell, the maximum radius of the blast, it's a random radius, is within the maximum range that you can cast it. So there is no way that you can cast the spell and not have a chance of getting caught in your own explosion. Um, when you cast Azure Flame, another classic, there is a chance that you can light your target on fire, but there is also a chance you can light yourself on fire with it. And if you summon a Shoggoth, that Shoggoth has to follow a task you set for it. And then once it's finished with that task, it has the choice of going off and doing its own thing, or deciding to hunt you down for your impudence of summoning it to do something. And since the Shoggoth is an intelligent thing, it will follow that task exactly to the letter, only to the letter, and then may work very hard to figure out how it can ruin your day in the meantime.
I have to admit, I love games where magic is chaotic a little bit. It doesn't have to. I love it when it doesn't go your way. Sometimes I love that. It
Mhm.
just makes the game more fun. A little bit about a question about character creation. For those that are familiar with the Legend of Five Rings or the Star Wars method of building characters, does this is it similar? Is it different?
It's very it's very different for the most part. There are some elements where you can see similarities, but I chalk that more up to there are certain ways that have sort of become established in creating characters in role playing games, and sometimes things end up rhyming, if you will. But I'd say it's pretty different from both Star Wars and L5R. For one thing, the goal is very simple character creation. I'd like you to be able to make a character in, well, or at least the mechanical elements of making a character in maybe half an hour. Obviously, the backstory and thinking about the story you're telling about your character and so forth, that can take a lot longer. But when you build your character, you are the first thing you're doing is you're determining your background, and that's like questions like what family did you grow up in? Are you from Arkham or did you move there? Are you rich? Are you poor? Are you a criminal? Also, and I think this is one of the most important questions, what is your first brush with the supernatural? Or have you never encountered the supernatural before? And all of these are completely narrative questions. They don't have mechanical elements, but it's encouraged you to start thinking about what your character is going to be. Second thing is you choose a personality trait. And so these are sort of broad personality traits that have both a narrative and a mechanical effect. If you, for example, choose the cautious personality trait, that indicates how your character may act, but also there becomes a unique way that you can spend a resource in the game that is good for you, and there is also a unique bad thing that'll happen to you if you suffer too much horror, basically. Then you choose an archetype. You can think of an archetype as a career or a class. And there, I'd say they're a little similar to the L5R schools, but again, a lot simpler. Each archetype, all it does is say that there are certain skills you can improve beyond the normal 4 plus. And there are a list of knacks, which you could also think of as feats or talents, that you can take. If the knack isn't in your archetype, you can't take it. There's a limited number of knacks you're going to choose from. It's still not entire. It's not a small number, but it is a list on one column of one page as opposed to a much bigger book of knacks. And then once you finish that, your character starts out with some skills being a little better than others. You pick a couple of skills to improve them. You start out with one knack, and this is something I did take from Star Wars and from every game I've worked on since. You get to choose whether you start with a little extra XP, a little extra money, or a little extra of a resource we call insight. Insight is the resource that you can spend. You could sort of think of them as story points or destiny points or bennies or so forth. But insight does work differently, but the idea is the same. It's a resource you have access to as a character or as a player that nobody else does, and it allows you to do some special things.
And this core rulebook is this is all you need to really run the game. It's not like how other systems has like a player's handbook, game master's guide, monster manual. This is all in one. Am
It's
I?
all in one. Yep, we are releasing more books to
Mhm.
help expand it, but when you get started, this thing's all you need.
And maybe we should talk a little bit about that now. So we talked about the starter set. We talked about the core rulebook, and soon we'll be coming out with looks like a series of adventures called Arkham Mysteries. Am I correct?
That is correct. So Arkham Mysteries is a three adventure anthology. Um, they are three separate adventures. They you don't need to play them all, but you can if you want. You can pick and choose to play through some of them. But we felt it was really important. There is a short adventure in the core book. There's a adventure in the starter set, obviously, but we felt it was important to release some other published adventures um, quickly, so that people had stuff they could do with our game. And Arkham Mysteries provides that. They're all mysteries set in and around Arkham, so obviously with the title. Um, and so if your characters are based in Arkham, or I mean, the nice thing is Kingsport, Dunwich, and Innsmouth are all relatively close by. So even if you're based in somewhere else in Massachusetts, you can get to Arkham and do these adventures. But gives players a good jumping off point, and there are a variety of there's a variety of themes in there. There's some that are a little more investigation, some that are a little more fighting involved, and some weird things happen. Some good weird.
Whether you've played games like Call of Cthulhu or Trails of Cthulhu or Delta Green all your life, or you're new to this game um, is set up so that anyone could just jump in and play.
Absolutely. We don't expect people need a deep background of the Cthulhu Mythos to play the game. One of the things we have in the core book is there's an introduction. Again, it was actually written by Maxine Newman, and she did amazing job on it. If you can read about 8 pages, then you can get the overview of what the entire world is all about. So even if you don't even know Cthulhu from whatever, but if you don't
Mhm.
know a thing about it, if you read those pages, you'll have a good idea. And similarly with the 1920s, obviously not everybody is a huge history nerd who wants to read about the 1920s, but we spend enough time talking in here about the things you need to know, um, that you don't need to worry about all of the specifics, about like exchange rates or honestly who even the president was or anything like that. You if you get the idea of flappers and fedoras, you're probably fine.
Oh, excellent. So there's a question I want to ask you that I've asked usually a lot of different creators that have written
Mhm.
that's added to the Cthulhu mythos, like these games. If I may ask, certain monsters just fall out of popularity, usually because their horror factor has diminished, like Frankenstein, Dracula, and so forth. But Cthulhu's been it's over 100 years old. The stories, I believe it's over 100 right now.
Yeah,
Um,
1920s.
Yeah, and it's still very popular. In fact, I think the popularity of it has increased much more in the last maybe 20 years than it has been previously. Why do you think that is? What is it about the Cthulhu mythos that still talks to people, hopefully good ways, even to this day?
I think a big part of it is the idea of this existential cosmic dread. You talk about Frankenstein and Dracula, and obviously we see those come and go, and probably things like vampires will never and such will never be really gone from us, but maybe they become a little less scary as we explore them. Maybe Frankenstein was a lot more terrifying before we could take a electroshock device and restart somebody's heart after they've essentially died, and it doesn't seem quite so unknowable now. And vampires, have been explored in a million different ways, so maybe people feel a little more comfortable with them. Zombies, sort of a similar thing. But I feel like with Cthulhu, with all of the ancient ones in the Cthulhu mythos, a big part of it is that they're unknowable, and that's kind of built into them, right? It always says you don't totally understand what's going on with them, and even if you win, you don't defeat them. You stop them. You push them back. You foil the plans of their agents, but the entities of the Cthulhu mythos are way bigger than that. Some of them are so big they don't even exist in this universe, and to even understand them would be to, like, cause your mind to just shatter. And so, one, I think it helps defy understanding, and two, they there's so much that is undefined about them that it lets us fill in the blanks with our own imaginations. And honestly, I think that's one of the most successful ways to create horror, is to let the person imagine the worst possible scenario for themselves, because whatever my readers imagine is going to be way worse than whatever I come up with.
Excellent. So currently, right now, Arkham Horror, you can find that Drive to RPG. I believe the core rulebook is on Drive to RPG.
Yes, sir.
Is the starter set available digitally as well?
We did not make the starter set available because after discussing it, we decided that there's too many there's too many components to it that we didn't feel like it actually came out with a very good experience when it was just a PDF version. But Arkham Horror is available on Drive Through, and so, yes, you can pick up the core book on Drive Through just fine. You can buy it at local game stores, and you can also buy it on the Asmodee web store, at least. And once it sells out, we'll just have to reprint it.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Sam, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about Arkham Horror, the role playing game. Both does the starter set, the core rulebook, and Arkham Mysteries, which should be coming out very shortly. Am I correct?
Next month or two.
So, viewers, I will put links to the description below of everything we talked about. So, if you're interested in the core rulebook, I'll put a link to Drive to RPG so you can check it out. If you haven't had a chance to check out the Arkham Horror card game, it's also very excellent. If you like, well, I believe you can play also with someone else. If I remember correctly, it's 2 players. But if you want to play alone, it's just as horrifying. So, viewers, thank you for watching. Stay safe out there. We'll see you next time.